Imagine, imagine it's 1,000 years from now,
Okay.
and a massive solar flare, or maybe just, you know, the relentless march of time, has completely wiped our digital slate clean.
Right. A total reset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the servers have crashed, the cloud is just gone,
Yeah.
and the vast libraries of paper books have long since decayed or burned up.
So we have basically nothing.
Pretty much.
Mm.
And future historians are desperately trying to reconstruct our 21st century society.
Good luck to them.
Right. I mean, they want to know about our politics, our complex religions, our daily routines, our deepest fears, maybe our sense of humor.
Oh, wow.
But the only things they have left to study, the only artifacts that manage to survive the elements, are our coffee mugs and our graphic T-shirts.
Oh, man. That paints a rather humbling picture of our legacy, doesn't it?
It really does.
I mean, they wouldn't have our grand constitutions or our, cinematic masterpieces.
No.
They would literally be piecing together the human experience from world's best boss mugs and faded Vans tees and those ceramic cups with sarcastic quotes about needing caffeine.
Exactly. What would they actually think of us?
Well, they probably assume coffee was some kind of demanding, vengeful deity we worshipped every morning.
They totally would. But, that scenario is not just a thought experiment.
Right.
And that brings us to today's deep dive. So if you are the kind of person who is insanely curious but hates information overload, you are in the perfect place.
Absolutely.
Because today, our mission is to uncover how the ancient Greeks captured their grandest myths and their most intimate and sometimes really embarrassing daily moments.
And they didn't do it in the medium we usually associate with them.
No, they didn't. They didn't do it in towering marble statues or sweeping epic poetry.
Right.
They did it on everyday household items.
Hey.
We're talking about baked clay vases.
Just everyday mud, basically.
Right, mud. To guide this exploration, we are relying on a truly comprehensive grounding source today.
Yes, we are using H.B. Walter's monumental text. It's called History of Ancient Pottery, Greek, Etruscan, and Roman.
And what Walters provides isn't just a dusty archaeological inventory, right?
Not at all. It is a vital lens into the ancient mind. I mean, when we think of Greek mythology today, we almost always rely on Romanized, heavily edited, highly polished classical literature.
Oh, totally. Like Ovid.
Exactly like Ovid. Writers who came centuries later, and they sort of smoothed out the rough edges and made the myths fit their own political or poetic agendas.
They took the raw, chaotic source material and just sterilized it for a new audience.
Right?
They smoothed out all the plot holes.
That is the perfect way to frame it. But the thing is, what's fascinating here is that these vases are contemporary documents.
Okay.
They were made by the Greeks, for the Greeks, while the culture was actually breathing.
Wow.
Yeah, they are entirely free from later academic pedantry. They represent the stories, the gods, and the heroes exactly as the everyday Athenian craftsmen. The potters, the painters, the people actually walking through the marketplace knew them.
So we are basically bypassing the Roman editors and going straight to the working class artists.
Precisely.
But to understand what they painted, we kind of have to start with the physical reality of the object itself, right?
Yes, the medium.
How do you even begin to tell a complex narrative on a curved piece of baked mud?
Well, the mechanical challenge of the medium dictates everything about the art.
Okay.
I mean, a vase painter is not working with a flat rectangular canvas pinned to a wall.
Right, obvious.
They are working with a three-dimensional object that curves away from the viewer.
So you can't see the whole thing at once.
Exactly. The eye cannot take in the entire image. The viewer has to physically move around the object or, turn the object in their hands just to experience the full story.
Which fundamentally changes how a story unfolds.
It does.
It's a medium that actually demands physical interaction. But before we get into the layout, there is a massive misconception from the source material that we need to clear up.
Oh, the illustrator fallacy.
Yes. When modern people look at an ancient Greek vase depicting, say, the Trojan War, our brains immediately jump to a specific conclusion.
We assume the artist sat down, read Homer's Iliad, and then simply drew what the text described.
Right. I think they were just illustrating the book.
It is incredibly pervasive, but Walters makes it emphatically clear that this is incorrect, at least for anything produced before the 4th century BC.
So they weren't just taking notes from Homer.
No, these vase painters were not taking dictation from Homer or any other epic poet. They were independent storytellers.
Okay. Drawing from where, then?
They were drawing heavily from local folklore, regional religious cults, and just oral traditions.
Wow.
The versions of the myths they painted might have completely contradicted the official Homeric versions that we consider canon today.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this premise based on the
Oh,
notes.
go for it.
Because we have countless faces depicting scenes that are, you know, straight out of the Iliad.
Right, right.
Like, for example, the funeral games of Patroclus.
Yeah.
That is a highly specific narrative event, right?
It absolutely is.
So if they weren't illustrating Homer, how are they depicting that exact moment in such detail?
Well, that's exactly it. The epic poems were, they were in the cultural air, right? Everyone knew the broad strokes of the Trojan War.
Sure.
But the key distinction is that the painters didn't treat Homer's text as a sacred, unchangeable blueprint.
Oh, okay.
They took immense creative liberties to serve their own visual medium. Take your example of the funeral games of Patroclus.
Okay.
In Homer's explicit, detailed description of the chariot races at these games, he specifically states that the heroes drove 2-horse chariots.
Right. Big detail.
But if you examine the black figure vases depicting this very scene, the painters almost invariably give us 4-horse chariots.
Wait, they doubled the horses.
They did.
Did the oral tradition change the number, or was it just an artistic choice?
It was entirely an artistic choice. A 4-horse chariot, a quadriga, simply looked more impressive.
Oh, wow. Just for the aesthetics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It created a denser, more dynamic composition of overlapping legs and muscular tension that filled the wide, curved space of the vase far better than a 2-horse chariot would.
That makes total sense.
The visual impact, the demands of the art itself, took absolute precedence over textual accuracy.
So the visual medium has its own specific demands.
Right.
It's basically the ancient equivalent of a film director changing the color of a character's car or, the location of a battle.
Yeah.
Just because it looks infinitely better on a widescreen format.
Perfect analogy.
The text is a starting point, not a straitjacket.
Exactly. And that leads directly into the actual methods they developed to solve this problem of visual storytelling.
Okay.
Because how do you show a sequence of events, a beginning, middle, and end, on a single static object?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Walters breaks the evolution of this down into 2 main phases, the complementary method and the isolating method.
Right, the complementary method being the older of the two.
Yes.
This is where an artist combines successive episodes of a single story into one unified, continuous scene.
Uh-huh.
But the crucial rule is that they never repeat the main characters.
Right. So you might see the buildup to a conflict on the left side of the vase, the actual battle in the center, and the tragic aftermath on the right.
And it all flows together.
It all flows together in one unbroken visual space, as if it's happening simultaneously.
But it requires a highly visually literate audience.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The viewer has to know the myth well enough to read the timeline across the surface of the pot.
Because spatial distance on the clay represents chronological distance in the story.
Exactly.
It's like a long exposure panoramic photograph that captures a runner at the starting line, in the middle of the sprint, and crossing the finish line all in one wide shot.
That's a great way to picture it. Later, however, Greek artists developed the isolating method,
Okay.
which aligns much closer to our modern sensibilities.
How so?
Well, instead of blurring the timeline into one panoramic landscape, they separated single, highly specific events and placed them in distinct framed panels or zones.
Okay.
Consider the individual labors of the hero Theseus. An artist might arrange them around the outer rim of a drinking cup.
Right.
Each labor is its own isolated snapshot, completely separate in time and space from the labor sitting right next to it.
It's the invention of the sequential comic book panel.
Basically, yeah.
And when we talk about packing a massive amount of sequential narrative onto a single piece of clay, the ultimate example from the source material is the Francois vase.
Oh, the Francois vase.
Reading about this object is just mind-bending. Walters highlights it as a pinnacle achievement.
He does.
It is the ultimate mythology in miniature.
Yeah, discovered in the mid-19th century by Alessandro Francois in an Etruscan tomb.
Okay.
It is an absolute masterpiece of early Attic black figure pottery. Physically, it is a large volute crater.
And a crater is...
A crater was a massive, wide-mouthed vessel used for mixing wine and water at banquets.
Right.
And the sheer volume of information the painter, Clysius, packed onto its surface is difficult to overstate.
I mean, it features 11 distinct mythological subjects.
11.
Arranged in 6 horizontal bands, or friezes, wrapping all the way around the vessel.
It's dense.
To give you some scale, the top band alone features the Caledonian boar hunt.
Yep.
Below that, you have the incredibly elaborate marriage procession of Peleus and Thetis, which is attended by an absolute parade of Olympian gods.
So many gods.
You have the tragic story of Troilos, and then on the very top lip of the vase, almost tucked away as a decorative flourish, you have a grand, chaotic combat between a tribe of pygmies and a flock of cranes.
The ambition of Clydius was to essentially map the entire mythological universe, from the heroic to the divine to the completely absurd, onto one functional object.
Crazy.
But what truly sets the Francois vase apart, beyond its compositional density, is its obsessive dedication to clarity.
Yes, the inscriptions.
The inscriptions.
The vase has 115 different inscriptions on it. 115 labels.
It's wild.
They didn't just label the major gods or the famous heroes, they labeled the horses pulling the chariots.
Right.
They labeled the dogs in the hunting scenes. They labeled inanimate objects.
Even the objects.
There is a scene depicting a fountain house, and on the ground, the artist painted a broken water pitcher.
Uh-huh.
Right next to it, he painted the specific Greek word for pitcher, just so you know exactly what piece of debris you were looking at.
It's almost funny. It demonstrates a fascinating psychological state of the artist.
How do you mean?
Clytius wanted absolutely no ambiguity. She wasn't trusting the viewer to simply vibe with the art.
Ah.
He was providing an exhaustive visual encyclopedia. He was ensuring that his specific interpretation of these myths was locked in permanently.
Well, since the Francois vase shows us how the Greeks meticulously mapped out their universe, let's zoom in on the absolute peak of that universe.
The Olympian gods.
The VIPs. Because when modern people envision the Greek gods, we usually picture those pristine, blindingly white, emotionless marble statues sitting in a museum.
Sure.
But the reality on the clay is completely different.
The vases strip away that sterile neoclassical veneer completely.
They really do.
On the pottery, the gods are deeply dynamic, they are violently active, they hold grudges, they are profoundly flawed, and frequently they are the subject of high comedy.
We see the action blockbusters first, though. Like the Gigantomachia, the great cosmic war between the gods and the giants.
Oh, the Greeks loved depicting the Gigantomachia. It represented the ultimate triumph of cosmic order over chaotic, earthborn brute force.
Right.
But what is striking in the vase paintings is how codified the battles became.
Like standard matchups.
Exactly. The audience knew exactly who was fighting whom, almost like a standardized sporting event.
The heavyweight matchups were locked in.
Yeah.
Athena is almost universally paired against the giant Enceladus.
Yeah.
Poseidon, the god of the sea, is always locked in combat with the giant polyboats. And Poseidon's finishing move is incredible. He doesn't just stab the giant with a trident. The myth states he tears off a piece of the island of Kos to crush polyboats.
A literal piece of land.
Yeah, which becomes the island of Niceros.
Which presents a unique visual problem for the painter. I mean, how do you clearly depict a god throwing an island?
Because a rock just looks like a rock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The vase painters solved this with a wonderfully literal approach.
Okay, what do they do?
They painted Poseidon hurling a massive, irregular shape. And to prove to the viewer that this shape was an entire ecosystem, they painted tiny animals, snakes, scorpions, maybe a goat crawling around on the surface of the rock as it flies through the air.
Wait, really? As he's throwing it?
Yes, as it flies through the air.
That is a brilliant, almost cartoonish solution to an abstract visual problem.
It really is.
And it shows that the painters had a sense of whimsy. I mean, they didn't just give the gods standard swords and spears.
No, they got creative.
Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, is often depicted fighting in the Gigantomachia not with a traditional weapon, but with the tools of his trade.
Right.
He wields a massive pair of forge tongs holding a burning red-hot coal, and he's thrusting it directly at his opponent.
Improvised, working-class weaponry elevated to a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
But the vases don't just show the gods as invincible warriors. They show them as an absolute mess sometimes.
Oh, totally.
The mythology was not a rigid, pious dogma that demanded silent reverence. The story of the return of Hephaestus is a perfect example of this.
The backstory here is pure soap opera.
It is.
So Hephaestus, the son of Hera, was thrown out of heaven. And in revenge for his exile, he crafts a beautiful magical throne and sends it to his mother as a gift.
That's nice.
Right.
Yeah.
But when Hera sits in it, invisible, unbreakable chains bind her.
A trap.
And no one in Olympos can figure out how to release the queen of the gods. And Hephaestus, sulking on Earth, absolutely refuses to come back and do it.
So the gods are at a stalemate. They initially send Ares, the god of war, to drag Hephaestus back by brute force.
Doesn't work.
No, Hephaestus simply chases the god of war away with fire from his forge.
Just chases him off.
Finally, they send Dionysus, the god of wine, and Dionysus realizes that brute force won't work. His strategy is entirely different.
What does he do?
He sits down with Hephaestus and gets him blackout drunk.
And this is the specific moment the vase painters love to capture.
They loved it.
The triumphant return of the blacksmith to Olympos. But it is not a dignified, holy procession.
Not at all.
You have Hephaestus, a major Olympian deity, completely inebriated. On the older black figure vases, he is usually slumped over the back of a mule, looking like he might slide off at any moment.
Just barely hanging on.
Yeah, and on the later red figure vases, he is stumbling along on foot, barely able to stand, literally leaning his weight on Dionysus, or just a random chaotic satyr just to stay upright.
It brings the terrifying remote power of the divine down to an entirely relatable mortal level.
It really does.
You have a dysfunctional family dynamic playing out on a wine mixing bowl. The queen of the universe is trapped in a chair, and her sons have to go on a bender to fix the situation.
It's like a sitcom plot.
It humanizes the pantheon in a way that monumental architecture never could.
Now, speaking of humanizing flaws, we have to talk about how they depicted the CEO of Olympus himself, Zeus,
Oh boy.
the guy who could not keep his lightning bolt in his pants.
The vases capture the full contradictory spectrum of Zeus.
Right.
On one hand, you have his majestic, world-altering moments. One of the most bizarre yet frequently depicted is the birth of Athena.
Well, that one is wild.
The myth states that she sprang fully formed and fully armed from the head of Zeus after he swallowed her mother, Metis.
Which is already a crazy image.
And the vase painters tackled this surreal concept incredibly literally. You see a stoic Zeus sitting on a throne, and a miniature, fully armored Athena is literally emerging vertically out of the top of his skull.
It is such a wild visual. But the sources highlight a fascinating detail about the economics of the pottery workshops regarding this specific scene.
Right, it reveals the reality of ancient commerce.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, the pottery district in Athens, the Kerameikos, was an industrial hub. These workshops were cranking out thousands of vases. They needed efficiency.
So they reuse stuff.
Exactly. The composition for the birth of Athena was wildly popular and highly structured. You had Zeus seated in the center. You had Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, standing on one side making gestures of assistance.
Okay.
You had other gods like Hermes or Apollo standing on the other side looking inward. It became a standardized, pre-practiced template for the painters.
Like a compositional blueprint that they could execute really quickly.
Precisely. Now, imagine a customer comes into the workshop and wants a nice vase depicting an assembly of the gods, but they don't necessarily want the birth of Athena.
Right.
What does the busy vase painter do? To save time, they would use the exact same birth of Athena compositional template. Yes, they paint Zeus in the center, Eileithyia gesturing, the other gods standing in their exact poses, all looking intently at the exact same spot above Zeus's head.
Oh, no.
But the painter simply leaves Athena out of the picture.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
So you have a majestic assembly of the most powerful beings in the universe, all standing around staring with intense focus at the top of Zeus's completely empty head for absolutely no reason.
Exactly. It highlights the friction between sacred mythology and the daily grind of mass production.
It really grounds the art in the reality of the people making it.
It does.
But Zeus's other major presence on the vases, as you alluded to, involves his notorious love affairs.
Right.
The painters were remarkably creative in depicting the various transformations he used to pursue mortal women.
Because he rarely just walked up and introduced himself. The mythology is full of these strange, metamorphic seductions.
But weird.
We see vases depicting the myth of Danae. She is locked in an impregnable bronze tower by her father. Zeus bypasses the physical barrier by descending upon her from the sky, not as a man, but as a literal shower of golden rain. The painters depict the gold falling into her lap.
Wow.
Or consider the story of Europa, where he disguises himself as a beautiful, tame, white bull. The vases show Europa sitting comfortably on the back of this bull, calmly riding it across the waves of the sea, often entirely unaware of the divine abduction taking place.
The visual variety of the gods is just incredible. But if we follow the vibe of that Hephaestus story, and we move away from the pristine peaks of Olympos, things get weird.
They get very weird.
They get wild, and eventually they get very dark.
We move into the realm of Dionysus. He is arguably the most popular figure across the entire spectrum of ancient Greek pottery.
Really, more than Zeus.
perhaps even rivaling the great heroes. And the reason for this is purely functional.
Because of wine?
Exactly. A vast majority of these decorated vessels, the craters for mixing, the kylixes for drinking, the amphorae for storage, were designed specifically to hold and serve wine.
It's synergistic marketing. You paint the god of wine on the object used to consume wine.
Perfect fit.
But the depictions aren't just dignified portraits of a god holding a cluster of grapes. The sources detail these chaotic scenes of the Dionysiac Komos.
The Komos was the wild, ecstatic, ritualistic revelry associated with the worship of Dionysus.
Just a massive party.
A party that was an abandonment of civic order. The vases hold nothing back in showing this chaos.
Okay, what do they show?
You have Dionysus, often accompanied by his mortal wife Ariadne, surrounded by his untamed retinue. You have the satyrs, those part man, part animal creatures driven by base instincts.
Right.
And you have the maenads, human women driven into a divine ecstatic frenzy, tearing through the woods.
The specific details the painters included make these scenes feel incredibly alive. It's not some generic, elegant dance.
No.
The sources describe satyrs engaged in aggressive, manic flute playing. But the best details are the deeply unserious, relatable ones.
What kind of details?
Right. Well, there are vases showing satyrs, seeing how long they can balance full drinking cups on their backs or their heads while dancing.
Like a frat party trick.
Exactly. Or satyrs literally playing on a seesaw with each other.
The artists are capturing the absurdity of intoxication. They are painting ancient party tricks.
And then there is the inevitable aftermath, the hangover phase.
The
The sources mention a vase where a frustrated older man is physically dragging a younger, completely wasted reveler home from the Komos.
Oh, that's great.
Right. The party was transcendent and wild. But reality still exists. Somebody still had to wake up and go to the agora the next morning.
That vase perfectly captures the core duality of wine that the Greeks understood so well. The divine, liberating ecstasy and the very mortal physical consequences.
Totally.
But the vases also follow this concept of duality to its ultimate, final conclusion. We go from the vibrant, pulsing life of the Komos to the absolute, terrifying stillness of the underworld.
This is a massive tonal shift in the source material. We move from Athens to the region of Apulia in southern Italy. The sources talk specifically about these massive, elaborate Apulian vases.
To understand the Apulian vases, we have to understand the shift in geography and philosophy.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Southern Italy, Magna Graecia, developed its own distinct pottery culture, heavily influenced by Orphic and Pythagorean mysteries, which placed a massive emphasis on the afterlife.
Oh, okay.
Unlike the Athenian vases, which were used in daily life and banquets, these colossal Apulian vases had a singular sepulchral function.
Meaning for funerals.
Yes. They were made specifically to be placed inside tombs.
So they were never meant to be seen by the living once the tomb was sealed.
Never.
They had a job to do for the dead.
They functioned as literal maps of the afterlife, meant to accompany, comfort, and perhaps guide the deceased through the underworld. They are massive, highly ornate, and often feature complex, multi-tiered depictions of the realm of the dead. In the center, grounding the composition, you usually have a pillared palace where Hades and Persephone sit in judgment.
And arranged around them is a who's who of eternal suffering.
Exactly.
It is a visual catalog of damnation.
You see figures like Orpheus trying to charm his way through the darkness with his lyre. But more prominently, the artists focused on the classic, terrifying punishments to reinforce the cosmic order of justice.
Like Sisyphus.
Yes, you see Sisyphus eternally pushing his massive rock up a steep incline. You see Tantalos.
Ooh, Pantalos.
Interestingly, on the vases, Tantalos isn't always depicted in a pool of water, reaching for fruit he can't quite grasp.
Wait, really? What is he doing then?
Sometimes the artists choose a more visceral punishment. He is depicted cowering on the ground under a massive boulder that is suspended over his head by a precarious thread.
Living in perpetual, agonizing anticipation of being crushed.
Exactly.
That psychological torture is arguably way more stressful than just being thirsty.
I agree completely.
And then the artists populate the space with the enforcers of this realm, the Furies.
The Erinyes, the avenging spirits of the underworld, the painters depicted them in truly horrific terms.
Yeah, the sources mention snakes.
Literal snakes entwined in their hair or wrapping around their arms. They are holding blazing torches or whips, ready to punish the wicked.
It is a stark, terrifying vision of the mechanics of justice after death.
It really is.
The Furies represent this fascinating intersection in Greek thought. I mean, they aren't just monsters. They are the physical embodiment of a concept like vengeance or guilt.
Right.
And the sources talk about how much the Greeks loved to personify abstract ideas on these vases. They gave physical form to the intangible.
It is one of the most intellectually ambitious aspects of Greek vase painting. The Greeks didn't just have gods of physical domains like the sea, the sky, or the harvest.
Right.
They elevated emotional states, psychological conditions, and abstract concepts to divine status. The challenge for the vase painter was, how do you draw an emotion?
Yeah, how do you paint fear?
They solved it through action and association. The sources show us they depicted Phobos, the literal personification of fear, driving the chariot of Ares, the god of war.
It makes perfect psychological and narrative sense. Fear is the vehicle that drives war forward.
Exactly. We see Apate, the personification of deceit. We see Lyssa, the terrifying personification of madness and blind frenzy.
Oh, wow.
The painters would sometimes draw Lyssa with a halo of blinding light radiating from her head to signify the dazzling, disorienting nature of insanity.
It is incredibly cinematic. But out of all these personifications, the one that undergoes the most radical visual evolution across the centuries of vase painting is Eros,
Oh, yes.
god of love.
The visual representation of Eros acts as a barometer for the cultural shifts in ancient Greek society.
Okay, how so?
If you look at the earliest Greek vases, the archaic black figure wears, Eros does not look anything like the chubby, diaper-wearing, cherub-shooting Eros that we associate with Cupid today.
Right, he is not a baby on a Valentine's Day card.
Not at all. In the early art, Eros is a normal, full-grown, incredibly athletic youth.
Like a soldier.
He looks like a young hoplite warrior or an Olympic athlete, differentiated only by a pair of large wings.
Okay.
In this era, Eros represents a powerful, dangerous, sometimes overwhelming physical force of desire that drives adult humans and gods to take drastic, world-altering actions. He is a cosmic heavyweight.
But then society changes, and the art reflects that change. What happens to Eros on the later vases?
As we move into the later red figure vases, and particularly those ornate Apulian vases from southern Italy, Eros goes through a radical downgrading.
A downgrade.
He shrinks. He goes from a powerful adult athlete to a boy, and specifically an incredibly androgynous, effeminate figure.
Interesting.
The painters begin adorning him with distinctly feminine jewelry, elaborate earrings, thick anklets, pearl necklaces. His hair is styled in complex feminine updos.
So his entire aesthetic softens. And what is he actually doing in these later scenes? Is he still driving cosmic forces of epic desire?
His actions become completely trivialized. Instead of interfering in epic battles or epic tragedies, you see this effeminate teenage Eros doing domestic chores.
Wait, chores.
He is shown helping Aphrodite adjust her makeup or hold her mirror, or, as the sources explicitly detail, he is shown playing a game called Mora with mortal girls.
Mora is essentially the ancient equivalent of the game where you throw out your hands and shout, how many fingers am I holding up? Yeah.
Yes, a simple parlor game. So the primordial god of love and desire went from a full-grown, world-shaking Vorse to a teenager wearing anklets, playing hand games with local girls in a courtyard.
He is a massive downgrade in cosmic importance. But it perfectly mirrors what was happening to the Greeks.
Right.
Society was shifting its focus away from the grand, epic, civic narratives of the classical period. The wars, the building of empires, toward the more intimate, private, domestic concerns of the Hellenistic era.
Exactly.
Love became less about world-shaking passion that burned down Troy and more about daily romance, courtship, and playful flirtation.
The gods became domesticated. But even when the gods were cosmic forces, everyday people still needed someone to bridge the gap between their grueling daily lives and the untouchable divine.
They needed heroes.
They needed figures who could bleed, who could sweat, who could fail, but who could still punch a monster in the face and win.
And when you look at the sheer volume of pottery produced, no hero dominates the clay quite like Heracles.
No one comes close.
He is the universal currency of heroism. He is absolutely everywhere.
He is the most malleable figure in myth. But what makes his presence on the vases so compelling is that he functions as the ultimate working-class hero.
Right. Consider the audience for these pots. Many were made by working-class craftsmen, sold in the agora, and used by everyday merchants, farmers, and soldiers.
Exactly.
Heracles wasn't a pristine king sitting comfortably on a throne making decrees.
No.
He was a guy who was constantly handed impossible, grueling, unfair tasks by a terrible boss, King Eurystheus.
Terrible boss. Yes.
He had to physically toil, he got covered in dirt, he suffered through his 12 labors. The common people deeply recognized and related to that struggle.
The vase painters captured the physical grind of his existence, the most famous labor, of course, being his battle with the Nemean lion.
Right.
The visual language for this fight became highly codified to emphasize the physical exertion. The sources point out two standard compositional types.
Okay, what are they?
You have the standing type, where Heracles and the lion are locked in a vertical, suffocating sumo-style wrestling match.
Okay.
And you have the crouching type, where they are rolling around on the ground, struggling in the dirt, entirely stripped of heroic glamour.
It looks like exhausting work. But he didn't just wrestle animals. The vases also capture some of the highly unusual, almost surreal, problem-solving moments in his mythology.
One of the most striking examples is the story of Heracles borrowing a golden bowl from Helios, the sun god.
Oh, this one is crazy.
The myth states that Heracles needed to cross the ocean to reach the cattle of Geryon. Frustrated by the heat of the sun and the vastness of the water, he literally stands on the shore, aims his bow at the sun, and threatens to shoot Helios if he doesn't lend him a boat.
Just threatening the sun.
Helios, perhaps amused by the sheer audacity of this mortal, lends Heracles the giant golden bowl that the sun uses to sail back across the ocean at night.
It sounds like a fever dream, but the vase painters actually committed this to clay.
We have a beautiful red figure vase showing a bearded Heracles wearing his trademark lion skin, sitting hunched inside a massive, perfectly round bowl, bobbing gently over the stylized waves of the ocean.
Wow.
It is a whimsical, almost fairy tale image that contrasts sharply with the brutal, muscular, monster-slaying scenes he is usually known for.
But the working class struggle pays off in the end. The apotheosis.
The ultimate reward for his earthly toil. The vases frequently depict his ascent to Olympos to become a god himself.
And how do they draw that?
The painters always render it with maximum grandeur. He isn't climbing a mountain path. He is riding up to the heavens in a magnificent four-horse chariot.
Naturally.
And the chariot is almost always driven by his patron goddess, Athena. It is the ultimate validation of enduring suffering.
So Heracles is the Pan-Hellenic superstar. His currency works anywhere in Greece.
Yep.
But if you lived in Athens during its rise to power, you had a hometown favorite who dominated the local pottery market. Theseus.
The prominence of Theseus on vases directly correlates with the political and imperial rise of Athens.
It was basically political, right?
Yes. As Athens began to view itself as the preeminent power in Greece, they needed a hero whose resume rivaled Heracles, but who belonged exclusively to them.
Right. They needed a symbol of Athenian exceptionalism.
They needed a local boy made good. They essentially co-opted his mythology as state propaganda.
And the Athenian vase painters, particularly those creating the shallow red figure drinking cups known as kylixes, leaned into this political messaging brilliantly.
Yeah, it did.
They didn't just paint a single image of Theseus on the side of a pot. They utilized the physical shape of the cup to tell a comprehensive narrative.
Right.
The sources detail how they mapped his sequence of labors, the tasks he performed on his journey to Athens, clearing the road of bandits and monsters around the outer edge of the cup.
So as you drink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As a user at a banquet held the cup by its twin handles and physically rotated it to drink, they would watch a continuous loop of Athenian triumph.
It's interactive.
They would see Theseus defeat the Minotaur, a crucial symbol of Athens, asserting independence from Minoan Crete, then rotate the cup to see him deal with Sinus the Pinebender, then slay the monstrous sow of Crommyon.
The physical interaction with the object reinforces the political narrative. It's ingenious.
Completely.
But we cannot discuss the heroes without addressing the gravitational center of ancient Greek storytelling, the Trojan cycle.
Right. The wellspring for so much of their art and literature.
Yes.
The vases cover the entire saga, from the inciting incidents to the brutal aftermath. But there is a fascinating artistic quirk regarding the very beginning of the war, the Judgment of Paris.
It perfectly illustrates how artistic conventions of a specific era dictate the narrative, sometimes at the expense of logic.
That's so.
Well, the story is the classic beauty contest. Paris, a Trojan prince, is tasked with judging who is the fairest among the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite.
Okay.
His choice of Aphrodite, who bribes him with Helen of Troy, kicks off the entire war. He is the central, indispensable figure of the event.
He is the judge in the Judgment of Paris.
Exactly.
But when you look at the earliest black figure depictions of this crucial scene, Paris isn't even painted on the vase.
The artists of that early period were deeply invested in the procession style of composition.
Huh.
They favored drawing neat, orderly lines of figures walking in the same direction across the curved surface. So they drew the god Hermes leading the three goddesses in a formal procession. Because space was limited, and because they assumed the viewer already knew the myth implicitly, they simply didn't bother wasting valuable canvas space on Paris himself.
They just assume you know the punchline. Like,
Yeah.
Paris is standing just off screen to the right, waiting for them. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
It is such a strange omission to modernize.
It is. But as artistic styles evolved and painters mastered more complex, overlapping groupings in the red figure period, Paris finally makes his appearance.
Finally.
The strict, formal procession is entirely abandoned. On later vases, you see a much more relaxed, moody, atmospheric scene. Paris is sitting on a rock in the countryside, tending his flocks, surrounded by his sheepdogs.
Just chilling.
Yeah. The goddesses gather around him in varying states of undress and active persuasion. The focus of the art shifted from a rigid divine parade to the intense psychological drama of a mortal making a catastrophic choice.
The calm before the storm. Because the end of that story is the exact opposite of calm. The Iliapersis, the sack of Troy. The sources emphasize how unflinchingly graphic these depictions were.
The vase painters did not sanitize the horror of war. They collapsed the prolonged chaos of the night. Troy fell into a single, devastating freeze of continuous violence.
It's intense.
You see the elderly King Priam seeking sanctuary by sitting on a holy altar, being brutally bludgeoned to death by Neoptolemus, who is actually using the body of Priam's own young grandson as the weapon.
Wow. That's horrific.
You see Ajax violently seizing the prophetess Cassandra, who is desperately, hopelessly clinging to a wooden statue of Athena.
It is pure tragedy. But we have to consider the context of where these objects lived.
Okay.
These massive craters depicting the brutal sack of Troy were used at dinner parties. They were used at the symposium.
Right.
So what does this mean for the consumer? Were aristocratic men casually drinking wine and eating olives while staring at King Priam getting beaten to death with a child on the centerpiece?
It seems contradictory until you understand the true nature of the symposium.
Tell me.
It wasn't merely a raucous drinking party. For the aristocratic men of Athens, the symposium was a structured, highly ritualized social gathering. It was an intellectual crucible. A major component was debate, reciting poetry, and philosophical inquiry.
So the violence wasn't just decorative background noise.
Exactly the opposite. A monumental crater depicting the sack of Troy sitting in the center of the room served as a deliberate intellectual prompt.
Oh, interesting.
As the men drank the wine mixed within it, they would examine the imagery and debate the underlying themes.
Okay.
They would argue about the ethics of war, the boundaries of divine sanctuary, the hubris of Ajax violating a temple, the tragedy of Priam, and the inescapable nature of fate. The art was engineered to provoke rigorous thought and civic discussion among the elite.
It's like putting on a deeply intense, morally ambiguous documentary at a dinner party.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
You aren't doing it to relax. You're doing it to stimulate a passionate argument with your peers. That makes the presence of such dark imagery perfectly logical. And it provides a seamless transition into the next layer of the pottery's function.
Which is?
Because while the gods and heroes provided the prompts for high-minded philosophical debates, the true magic of these vases is their role as a mirror. They reflect the exact, mundane, everyday lives of the people who interacted with them.
We step out of the mythic past and into the vibrant, sweating reality of the present.
Right.
And a massive part of that reality, central to Greek civic identity, was athletics, the palestra, the wrestling school, and the gymnasium.
The Greeks had a cultural obsession with physical perfection and competition. And we see an entire, highly specialized category of vases dedicated to this, the Panathenaic amphorae.
These were not just commemorative souvenirs. They were literal, highly lucrative trophies.
Right.
At the Great Panathenaic Games held in Athens, the victors did not receive mere medals. They received these massive, specialized amphorae filled to the brim with sacred olive oil harvested from the groves dedicated to Athena.
Which is basically an ancient cash prize.
The oil itself was immensely valuable.
Yes. And the decoration on the vase actually documented the victory.
Yes. On one side of the amphora, you always had a standardized, rigid, archaic figure of Athena striding forward, representing the state sanction of the games. But on the reverse side, the painter depicted the exact athletic event the victor had won.
And the detail is crazy, right?
The level of specific, observed detail is astounding. We don't see generic men running. We see boxers with their hands wrapped in specialized leather thongs, their faces sometimes painted with realistic swelling or bleeding from the match.
Oh.
We see long jumpers suspended in midair, clutching the specific weights, the halters that they swung backward to increase their forward momentum.
The mechanics of the sport captured perfectly. But the detail I found most fascinating wasn't the athletes, it was the trainers.
Ah, yes. The trainers are always present on the periphery. They are depicted wearing heavy cloaks, indicating they are observing, not working out, and they are invariably holding long, forked wooden sticks.
Forked sticks. They were literally standing there poking the athletes.
They were.
If an athlete's form was sloppy, or if a wrestler committed a foul, the trainer would reach out and physically jab them with the stick to correct them.
Right.
It strips away the romanticism of the ancient Olympics and shows you the grueling physical reality of practice.
It grounds the divine pursuit of perfection right in the dirt of the palestra. But the vases also document the lives of those who never had the luxury of spending all day in the gymnasium.
Right, the blue-collar workers.
The sources highlight what we might call the blue-collar vases.
The economic engine of the city.
We see the tradesmen and the laborers. We see a shoemaker sitting in his cluttered shop, surrounded by various knives and laths, cutting leather to measure for a customer standing right in front of him.
Very mundane.
We see potters, in a wonderfully self-referential moment, sitting at their wheels shaping the very clay vessels we were discussing, while an assistant manages the intense, dangerous heat of the kiln.
We see the agricultural backbone of society, too. The sources point out a truly remarkable vase depicting an olive merchant.
Yes, that one.
The scene shows the merchant actively negotiating a sale, evaluating the product, and painted right next to him, floating in the air as if he is thinking it or muttering it under his breath like a prayer, is the inscription, "O Father Zeus, may I be rich."
Oh, Father Zeus, may I be rich.
It might be the most universally human sentiment ever recorded in antiquity.
It really is.
A working man, 2.5 millennia ago, just trying to make a buck, praying to the king of the gods for a better profit margin on his olives.
Sure.
You cannot get more relatable than that.
True.
But the vases also take us away from the public marketplace and the all-male gymnasiums, bringing us inside, into the domestic sphere. The women's quarters, the gyneconitis.
The lives of ancient Greek women, particularly respectable Athenian women, were highly restricted. They were largely confined to the interior of the home. Consequently, the vases offer a rare, intimate visual record of that secluded world. We see tranquil scenes of women at their toilet, fixing their hair, passing mirrors back and forth, adjusting their jewelry.
Yeah.
We see them engaged in the vital, constant economic work of the household. Spinning wool, working at large, upright looms, folding textiles.
The sources highlight one specific type of daily chore, the hydrophoria or water-drawing scenes, that perfectly demonstrates the genius of Greek pottery design.
Fetching water from the public fountain house was one of the few socially acceptable reasons for respectable women or their female servants to leave the confines of the house.
Right.
It was a daily communal necessity, and they painted these specific scenes on a very specific type of vase called a hydria.
And the physical shape of the hydria is crucial here, isn't it?
It is. A hydria is a specialized water jug. It features a wide, bulbous belly to hold a large volume of water and a narrow neck to prevent the water from sloshing out while walking. But the defining feature is its 3 handles. 2 sturdy horizontal handles on the sides used for lifting the heavy vessel, and 1 vertical handle attached to the back of the neck used for pouring the water out.
So keeping that specific physical shape in mind, look at how the artist painted the women interacting with the pots on the surface of the vase itself.
Right.
The paintings show a line of maidens walking to the fountain. The women who are walking toward the fountain house, whose pitchers are completely empty, are depicted carrying the hydriae balanced horizontally flat on top of their heads.
Okay.
But the women walking away from the fountain, whose pitchers are now full of heavy, shifting water, are depicted carrying them vertically on their heads, reaching up to grip that vertical back handle to steady the weight.
The shape of the actual vase perfectly dictates and mirrors the real-world physical action painted on its side.
It is essentially an instruction manual integrated into the artwork.
Oh.
Carry horizontally when empty, hold the vertical handle when full.
Exactly. The art is not just decorative, it is entirely unified with the lived physical experience of the user.
It represents an absolute harmony of form, function, and narrative. To complete our tour of daily life, however, we must return to the setting where so many of these objects were actually used, the symposium.
We discussed the intense debates over the Trojan War craters, but the symposium was also about unwinding. The vases show us the mechanics of the ancient boys' night out.
We see the men reclining on their specialized dining couches.
Right.
They are always propped up comfortably on their left elbows. This specific posture leaves their right hands entirely free to eat, to hold their drinking cups, or to gesture emphatically while arguing.
And crucially, it leaves their right hands free to play games. The sources detail the obsession with katabos.
Ooh, Cottabos.
Katabos was the immensely popular drinking game that dominated the later hours of the symposium.
How do you play it?
Well, the mechanics relied on the specific shape of the kylix, the wide, shallow drinking cup with two handles. The goal was to take the very last few drops of thick wine dregs left at the bottom of your cup, hook your index finger through one of the handles, and flick those dregs across the room at a specific target.
Wait, they're flicking wine.
Yes. Usually the target was a small bronze disc balanced precariously on a tall metal stand. The goal was to knock the disc down with a satisfying clang.
It requires a bizarre combination of increasing inebriation and fine motor control.
Exactly.
The vase painters captured the men mid-flick, their faces locked in intense concentration, swinging the shallow cups by the handles.
It's a great visual.
When you pull back and look at all these daily life scenes collectively, the athletes aggressively training in the palestra, the merchants hustling for a profit in the market, the women documenting their intricate hair and makeup routines, the men playing late-night drinking games. It feels incredibly familiar. It's like scrolling through a highly curated social media feed from 500 BC. You have the fitness influencers, the finance bros, the get-ready-with-me tutorials, and the blurry late-night club photos.
Yep.
It is the exact same chaotic human energy, just captured on baked clay instead of a digital server.
That analogy holds up surprisingly well, particularly because, much like a modern social media feed, these vases are not just a collection of silent aesthetic images.
Right.
They are incredibly loud. They are covered in text.
Which brings us to the final layer of our deep dive, the inscriptions. The images give us the visual context, but the absolute most compelling part of these vases is that the Greeks actually left us their exact, unfiltered words, complete with spelling mistakes.
For philologists and linguists, the text on these vases is an unparalleled goldmine.
How so?
As we established, the men painting these pots were not elite, highly educated scribes copying official state decrees. They were working-class craftsmen operating in the noisy, dusty Kerameikos district.
They didn't have editors or autocorrect?
And because they lacked that formal oversight, they often spelled words phonetically. They spelled words exactly how they sounded when shouted across the workshop or spoken on the streets of Athens.
Rather than how they were supposed to be written.
Exactly. Rather than informal, archaic literature, the sources provide the perfect example of a painter writing the name of the hero Theseus. Instead of the formal, multi-vowel spelling, they simply write Thysus.
It's ancient street slang captured in clay.
It really is.
We are actually seeing the dropped vowels and the lazy pronunciations of the working class. We can hear their accents.
It provides a linguistic reality check, proving that the spoken language was evolving rapidly, separate from the rigid written tradition.
But it gets even better than phonetic spelling.
Yeah.
Because we literally can hear them talking, thanks to the invention of the ancient speech bubble.
Yes.
I was stunned reading the sources to learn that the Greeks used speech bubbles.
They did indeed. They weren't circled with a clean white line like a modern comic book panel.
Okay, what do they look like?
Instead, the painter would write a string of letters issuing directly from the mouth of a painted character, floating outward into the empty negative space of the vase.
And the quotes themselves are fantastic. They're not quoting lofty passages of Homer. It is mundane, immediate, everyday chatter.
Exactly.
The sources list several examples. There is a vase depicting a symposium scene with a young servant boy pouring wine into a cup. And the text spilling out of his mouth simply says, "Pour in sweet wine."
A literal, functional command documenting the action.
Then there is an athletic scene. A man is standing on the sidelines watching a foot race. His mouth is open, and his speech bubble says, "Polymenon, you win."
Right.
He is screaming for a specific runner. He is an ancient sports fan losing his mind in the bleachers.
It shatters the distance between the art and the viewer. You are no longer just observing a historical document of a race. You are standing in the crowd, hearing the roar of the spectators.
And my absolute favorite quote comes from the end of a symposium scene.
Oh, this one.
A man is leaning back heavily on his couch, his posture completely defeated. He has clearly consumed entirely too much wine, and the text floating from his mouth is just a groan of surrender. It translates to, "I can no more."
The universal, timeless cry of a person who desperately needs to go to sleep.
It is brilliant.
Mm.
But beyond the speech bubbles and the phonetic slang, there was another highly specific type of text painted on these vases that reveals a deeply ingrained cultural phenomenon.
The Kelos names.
Telos names.
The Kelos inscriptions represent a unique sociological quirk of ancient Athens. The word kalos simply translates to beautiful or handsome.
Okay.
Potters would frequently paint inscriptions on their vases consisting of a specific young man's name, followed by the word kalos. For example, an inscription might read, Leagros is beautiful, or Leagros kalos.
These are the names of real people.
Yes.
They were essentially ancient celebrity crushes.
Exactly. These names belong to the popular, wealthy, handsome, aristocratic youths of the day. These were the young men who were the stars of the palestra, the most desired and talked about guests at the symposiums.
Wow.
They were the local celebrities, the influencers, the it boys of Athenian high society.
But why is a working-class potter writing a wealthy teenager's name on a cup? Does the vase feature a portrait of this Leagros?
In almost all cases, no.
No.
The Kalos inscription is completely separate from whatever myth or scene is actually painted on the pot.
Really?
You could have a magnificent vase depicting Heracles violently strangling the Nemean lion, and hovering right above the life and death struggle, completely unrelated to the art, is the text. Leagros is beautiful.
Wait, so the potter is essentially slapping a trending hashtag onto his product to drive sales?
That is the exact commercial mechanic at play. It was brilliant marketing savvy. The Potters knew their audience.
That's amazing.
If Leagros is the most talked about popular young man in Athens that season, then all of his friends, all of his admirers, and all of his social rivals are going to want to own a vase with his name conspicuously painted on it.
Obviously.
By tagging the vase with a trending celebrity name, the potter instantly increased its cultural relevance, its desirability, and ultimately its price in the agora.
Buy this Heracles drinking cup, now featuring the trending Leagros hashtag.
Exact.
It proves that thousands of years ago, human nature, the mechanics of marketing, and the absolute obsession with celebrity culture were exactly the same as they are today.
Nothing changes.
The technology changes from clay to silicon, but the underlying social dynamics remain entirely constant.
So true.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We have seen how these ancient vases serve as an incredibly dynamic intersection of the divine and the domestic. They reveal a culture that absolutely revered its gods and its epic heroes, building massive, complex mythologies around them. But a culture that also loved a good sitcom joke about a drunk blacksmith god, a hard-fought foot race in the dirt, a profitable business negotiation in the market, and a sweet cup of wine shared with friends.
When you pull back and view the entirety of this source material, it emphasizes a crucial point about how we should engage with history.
Which is?
History is always most valuable and most resonant when we actively strip away the intimidating, sterile facades and look for the genuine humanity underneath.
Yeah.
The people of ancient Greece were not abstract concepts. They were not flawless marble statues. They were workers complaining about their bosses, athletes sweating in the gymnasium, fans screaming in the stands, and revelers trying to shake off a brutal hangover.
Exactly.
They were people who wanted to be successful, who wanted to be loved, and who wanted to be remembered.
They were us, just navigating life without electricity. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think back to that scenario we started with. The future historians digging through the ashes of our society. Think about the incredible, almost humorous irony of historical survival.
It is pretty ironic.
The ancient Greeks built massive, towering statues of bronze and ivory. They engineered soaring temples of solid marble, designed with mathematical precision to last for eternity, built specifically to achieve immortality.
And today,
Almost all of those grand, monumental efforts are completely gone. The bronze was melted down centuries ago to make weapons. The marble was burned in kilns to make lime, or simply ground to dust by time and war.
God.
But what actually survived to tell their story? The mud. The everyday dirt, dug out of the ground, spun on a simple wooden wheel, baked in an oven, and painted by anonymous working-class artisans.
That's right.
The most fragile, mundane, easily breakable objects in their homes, their water jugs and their mixing bowls, became the unbreakable time capsules of their entire civilization. The Tupperware outlasted the temples.
That's a profound way to look at it.
So look around your room, or your desk, or your kitchen right now. What everyday, fragile, completely mundane object sitting next to you might end up surviving the eventual collapse of our civilization to tell your exact story to someone holding it carefully in their hands 2,000 years from now.
Something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.